out to Notre Dame fight song on stage before. That's pretty cool. Well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for that introduction. I wish Swati were on hand to introduce me everywhere I went. I feel inspired just listening to her, and then I got to figure out a way to live up to it. And I want to thank all of you for being prepared to step into that proverbial arena, because it's not easy. I can tell you that. I got some of the wounds to show for it, and yet I never regret for 1 second any of the times that I've stepped in, win or lose. I bring you progressive greetings from the home state of Mike Pence. So if anybody tells you that it can't be done in a red state, I want to let you know that there is no place in America where we shouldn't be running and winning in races where people with our values step up. And that's why I was so heartened to see that map and the sheer number of offices where we at the very least have to be competing if we want to have a shot. I want to make sure we have a good amount of time for questions and answers, so I just want to share a little bit about my story, about how I got here, a little bit about what possessed me to run for DNC chair, and a little bit about why I think for our country right now, salvation is going to come from the state and local level that, if perhaps unsexy, has never been more important. But I'll try to do all that very quickly so that we can really get into more of a conversation. One of the formative experiences I had that same year that Swati and I were knocking on doors in what in retrospect may have been an unwinnable race, but one that I'm glad that we did. I was involved in a project. It was right around the earliest times that people were starting to use the word millennial. And I got involved in this project that was a survey. It was research on the attitudes of young people toward politics and public service. And the basic research question was, why aren't young people engaged? And so we asked about how many young people were involved in volunteering, how many of them were doing community stuff, how many of them had contributed by knocking on doors for a campaign or ever thought about running for office. And what came back was data suggesting that while the rate at which young people were getting involved in campaigns was near an all-time low, the rate at which people were getting involved in their community and in volunteering was actually approaching an all-time high. And that was when the question began to shift from what is wrong with young people, that they don't care about the world around them, to what is wrong with our political process. Young people who clearly care about the world around them still think that politics and running for office has very little to offer them. And the striking thing, some 15 years later, is that so many of the people that I knew in college who were focused then squarely on volunteerism or community projects are now talking about politics and thinking about running for office. I think largely because of the discovery that a lifetime's good work can be wiped out by one stroke of bad policy if we don't have a handle on the political side. I do have the best job in the world. I'm mayor of my hometown. And if you have any doubt that that's the best job in the world, I dare you to name a better professional experience than walking onto the concourse of a minor league baseball stadium in a city that you're the mayor of. It just feels great. And it's my hometown. And I'm so glad also that you're being encouraged to go home. Actually, a lot of the people who have added the most value, a lot of the people I've recruited into my administration are people who were from Indiana, who went off to another city, maybe somewhere where the pay was higher. Of course, the rent was usually higher too. And then came home, brought that with them. And sometimes, as a friend, actually a classmate of ours from Oxford said to me once, in this country, you got to be from somewhere. And sometimes you have to make that choice to go to a rather unglamorous place, but a place that you care about, knowing that you can really make a difference there. I returned home after working in Chicago. I bought a fixer-upper in the neighborhood I grew up in, and I ran for an office that I never would have guessed that I would have run for when we were knocking on doors in college. It was Indiana State Treasurer. A guy named Richard Murdoch, and he was the incumbent state. He later became a household name for sharing his insights on the theology of rape. It was actually something that made it possible for a Democrat to become the United States Senator from Indiana. But this was before any of that. He was a state treasurer in what is supposed to be a kind of plodding, bureaucratic, technocratic job that's making sure that the pension money of the state is in good shape. And he used the fact that he was the treasurer and the pensions had some bonds in companies like Chrysler to try to block the rescue of the auto industry. Now, I got to understand what that means in a place like Indiana. If you go down US 31 through Kokomo, Indiana, on the right, there's a factory with about 2,000 jobs in it. On the left, there's a factory with about 4,000 jobs in it, both of them connected to Chrysler, just in those two buildings alone. And an Indiana elected official wanted to shut that down because he was mad at the president. I thought, there's got to be somebody running against this guy. So I asked around, and it turned out nobody was running against this guy. So I said, well, I'll do it. And then I learned the hard way how politics works. I made a list of everybody I'd ever met, everybody I went to school with, everybody whose business card I had, and I called them up one by one, and I asked them for money. I went to almost every one of the 92 counties. We missed one because of a severe storm and another one because we couldn't find any event going there to invite myself to. But we basically went everywhere in Indiana. Every chicken dinner, every county fair. And this did not necessarily come natural to me, nor was I a natural figure striding across the county fairground in Boone County, Indiana, a guy in his 20s with a funny name and an Ivy League degree trying to get people to care about a race for state treasure. And the surprising thing was I started to enjoy it. I'm not even an extrovert. It's not in my nature to go to total strangers and ask them to care about what I'm doing, interrupt them as they're enjoying their pork tenderloin sandwich on the fairground. But it was fun. I was on hand for the breaking of the world record for the most fried chicken ever assembled into a single serving. 1,600 pounds. This is in Brookville, Indiana. They put it in a canoe. They decided that the Canoe Fest was getting a little boring, and they said, well, how can we make it more exciting? Let's get in the Book of World Records. Said, how do we do that? Well, we love fried chicken. Let's put the most fried chicken in a canoe. It was an amazing thing. And we laid out our policies, and we developed a press plan, and I had a tiny staff, but a brilliant staff. And then Election Day came in 2010, and I got my ass handed to me. It wasn't even close. It was about 60-40. It can be a little demoralizing when you realize that hundreds of thousands of people have decided that somebody other than you ought to have this job that you're seeking. Usually when you apply for a job and you don't get it, you understand there's a committee, maybe there was another competitor, they're moving in a different direction. When hundreds of thousands of people have said, I want this guy and not you, it can get at your ego a little bit. But things have a way of working out. So I was home licking my wounds, deciding what I wanted to do next. Was I going to go on active duty? I was a reservist, but I hadn't taken active duty orders at the time. Was I going to go back to the private sector firm I was in? When the mayor of our city announced he wasn't going to run again, creating the first open seat in 24 years. And all of those friends, all of those South Bend expats that I used to grab a beer with whenever the two of us crossed paths in Chicago or DC or wherever we were, talking about home, talking about what's going on with our city. And I should probably mention, if you're not familiar with South Bend, that even though it's on the map because of the university that's there, it's a city that really grew up not around academia but around industry. It's a city that was a company town for Studebaker, back when the Big Three was the Big Four. And when Studebaker made its last car in 1963, tens of thousands of jobs disappeared, and tens of thousands of people disappeared with it over the 70s and 80s. So the week that I ran, the week that I got into the race, we got phone calls asking, do you have any response to the article? I said, what article? There was a Newsweek article listing us as one of America's 10 dying cities. That's where we started out. But it was also a community, I felt, that was ready for something different. And my friends who got together with me to try to put together this campaign, and I went through a moment that I think happens to everybody who takes that leap, I think probably has already happened to all of you or you wouldn't be sitting there. And that's this magical moment when you've been asking this question, why don't they? Whenever you hear yourself starting a question that, why don't they do something about this issue? Why doesn't somebody make sure that the city's moving in the right direction? Why haven't they fixed this issue? Just stop and say, why don't I? Why don't we? You begin to take ownership of that problem and ownership of the solution. And that's what happened. And to make a very long story short, I'm pleased to report to you that now, in my 6th year as mayor, South Bend is experiencing its fastest population growth in a quarter century. We've got investment happening in the heart of a city at the pace that we haven't seen in my lifetime. We're seeing a city that's believing in itself again. We had so many vacant and abandoned houses when I took office that nobody knew how many we even had. The day I found that out was the day all my interns were notified they were now code enforcement interns and were going to be doing an inventory so that we could tell how many vacant and abandoned houses we had. And the answer was about 1,300. So we decided to undertake 1,000 houses in 1,000 days. And by day 1,000, over 1,100 houses had either been repaired if they could or torn down if they couldn't, so that they weren't collapsing and harming the neighborhoods around them. It's a city that now realizes that we can take matters into our own hands, move forward, and succeed. That's why this is the best job in the world. You look at a place you care about, and you watch it change before your eyes. So why would I offer to leave or attempt to leave this job, the best job in the world, in order to run for chair of the DNC? Probably the most thankless job in American politics, and an extremely important one. And I should note for the record, having not won that, it's very important to me to support the chair and the committee right now and the good work that they're doing. I know this is not a partisan event, but I just want to mention that. Look, we're in trouble. I mean, you saw that map. I think it's particularly important for progressives to recognize we're not in trouble because we lost the White House. We would be in trouble even had we won the White House. And it's taken losing the White House to start this conversation that has thankfully shocked us into realizing we can't talk about the presidency like it's the only office that matters. You know, in the last presidency, we saw that. You know, for good or for ill, today I guess it's for good. The president doesn't always get what he wants. It really has to do with making sure that at every level and in every state and in every community, we are backing the values that hold us together. And so the other two things I want to really press today before we get into a conversation is offering a framework about what those values are, and then making the case for talking about them as close to the ground as we can possibly get. So first of all, what are those values? We all have a different account probably, or at least a different shape to the way we think about the values. But I think our values align, and we don't have the wrong values. I think our tactics need a little work, but our values are the right values. The way I talk about it is that we need to stand up for freedom, fairness, families, and the future. And you'll notice that two of those are things that conservatives are often a little more comfortable having in their vocabulary. I believe it's time for us to take it back. Take freedom, for example. And this is what happens when you start thinking about people's actual... Are we not those who care more about freedom? Even before there was an authoritarian president taking office. Think about the freedoms that actually matter in your life. Our libertarian friends and our conservative friends, and they're good people, many of them, most of them. They're serious about freedom, but they miss something incredibly important. Government is not the only thing that could make people unfree. That's the thing they miss. The whole reason we have government is to prevent private actors from making us unfree. You're not free if you're living with the weight of medical debt that is bankrupting your family. You're not free to live a life of your choosing if you're bogged down by student debt. You're not free from banks jerking you around if there's no CFPB. I'm not even free to start a family if it weren't for the freedom to marry. So if you really think about the freedoms that affect your life, is it the freedom to pollute a river somewhere, or the freedom from being in too high of a tax bracket? Or is it other freedoms that are no less important, that really touch down for most of us? In fact, I would argue, not to get too philosophical about city affairs, but I would argue that our freedom to achieve the meaning of life begins with things like roads and sewer infrastructure. Because whatever the meaning of life is for you, and I don't know what it is for each of you, might have to do with faith and family, might have to do with starting a business or scholarly pursuits or public service, but whatever it is, I know for a fact you'll be better able to achieve it if there's a road to get you to where you're going, and if you don't have to worry about where you're going to get clean, safe drinking water. We are the guardians of freedom right now. Freedom is one. Fairness is another one. Now, fairness should always be in our sweet spot as progressives, and yet, sickeningly, it was stolen from us as a theme, I believe, in the last election. And this is an area where I think we've got to do a little bit of introspection. When, for example, the now president said elections are rigged, we were clutching our pearls, saying, how could you say such a thing? And of course, partly we were saying that because what he was saying was absurd. People aren't going in by the busload and fraudulently voting. But there was an undertone to that. And the undertone to that was he was saying the system is wired against you. And we were sounding like we were saying, the system's perfectly fine, which was not convincing because it is not true. How can anybody look at the way districts are drawn for Congress or State House in most states in this country and say that they're free and fair, right? We know that there are a lot of ways in which our politics is facing structural unfairness and, of course, economics too. So it's got to be up to us to confront the systemic unfairness in our political and economic systems and be the ones who stand up for a better way and a fairer way, because one thing they're most certainly not doing right now is making our economy or our politics any more fair. I also believe, by the way, fairness is the way we square the circle around this really insidious false choice that's being laid at our feet, that progressives who want to win elections are going to have to choose between standing up with white working class people who feel left out of the economy and staying true to our tradition, the bedrock of our moral authority as a movement, which is our commitment to racial and social justice. You know what those two things have in common? Fairness. And they are two sides of the same coin, not a choice that we got to go down one way or the other. Next, family. And family is one that, again, we have, I think, unfortunately allowed our friends of other political persuasions to kind of own as a theme, which is really too bad because I not only believe, I know that families are better off when policy decisions are guided by our values. Leaving aside the fact that I wouldn't even be able to have a family if it weren't for progressive activism. Okay? But more than that, I mean, for example, today, actually very soon, a family in my community is going to be broken up because somebody who has been in the community for 17 years, he's a small business owner, he's got 3 kids, went in, as he does every year, trying to do the right thing, working toward his work permit and eventually green card. He went in for a check-in with ICE. Only instead of what usually happened, which is them taking his information, keeping tabs on what he's up to, and him notifying them that he's continued to pay taxes and has not had so much as a traffic ticket. This time, unlike every other time, when his wife was out waiting in the car, they came out to her and said, "I'm sorry, but your husband's been detained. And we've been notified that he is going to be deported, effective today." Tell his 8-year-old kid who just wants to be around his dad that the folks in power right now care about family. I think we've got to own what it means to support families, especially in this decade with everything that's going on. Not to mention the fact that it's going to be really hard for anybody to raise a family if they can't get a raise, which is something that we've been for quite a long time. So we've got to be talking about families, but in ways that are close to the earth. And even when we talk about the future, and it generally doesn't get more abstract than we talk about things like the future, right? But to me, the most salient issues of the future, national security and climate change, are issues that we've got to learn to talk about in terms of how they hit the ground. National security matters to me because I might be sent to war again. I'm still on the books of the IRR. If President Trump decides I need to be in Libya, I suppose he can make a phone call and that could happen. There's a lot of people in our communities and our families and our friendships. It's not just something that happens on a chessboard. It's something that happens at kitchen tables when somebody is not there because they're on a deployment. That's what national security means at home. Same thing with climate change. Climate change isn't just happening to glaciers. It's happening to our communities. We got a street in South Bend, Frederickson Street, where the homes were nearly wiped out by a rainfall that would qualify statistically as a 1,000-year rainfall. And a few days after that happened, we had a 100-year rainfall. Now, either it just so happens that I managed to be alive for both the 1,000-year and the 100-year rainfall, and they happen to be in the same season, or something's going on. So when we talk about looking after the future, we've got to talk about being guided by values that are going to make people better off on the ground in their lives right now. And I think nobody is better positioned to do that than actually people who are relatively new to the political process. Because you haven't been around long enough to get caught up in the game, to get caught up in this discussion that talks about the politicians and our antics, talks about our people and their people, as if that's what matters most, when what really matters most is what happens to us in our daily lives. Think about your most compelling memories in your life. Think about the things that have truly, I'm not talking about you're flipping through the paper and you're like, that's nonsense. I'm talking about things that really made you angry or really made you happy. They're probably things that happened in your actual life, not things that you saw on television. They're probably things that happened between you and somebody you love, or somebody you know, or somebody you're in some kind of professional or personal relationship with. That's the level in which we are made happy or unhappy. And that's the level at which we need to hold the results of every political decision that gets made accountable. It's time for a new politics of the everyday. And now is our chance to deliver that. So again, I promise not to talk for too long. I'd love to get into more of a Q&A, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
We've got some questions. Mayor Pete says he's going to stick around for a few questions. We've got Suraj coming to the mic. We're going to take 3, guys. 3 questions. Suraj, will you come? There's some folks right over here.
Thank you so much. Excuse me. You have encouraged people to return home, which is awesome for people who are young and maybe they've gone to college, they've had their first job. There are a lot of great young people here. I'm 44 and I'm married with 3 children, so going back home where I have roots is not going to happen. So could you address the impediment and how to get past that impediment for people in my situation who, you know, are not going to be able to pull that sort of native card out of their hat and talk about the glory days of, you know, when they were growing up and reference that when they're trying to enter into the political scene?
Yeah, let me suggest, my son, first of all, home, wherever you're raising your children, that's home, right? It may not be where you got started, but surely that's home. That's a place you're going to fight for, right? Because that's where your family is. You know, obviously, selfishly, I'm for everybody who's from South Bend coming back and contributing in South Bend, but there are a lot of ways to understand what home is. I would actually argue that if you stand apart from where you live in some way, you may have a little more to offer. For me, that happened because I was away and then I came home. For you, it may be because you bring a different perspective to the place you live in. What I wouldn't necessarily do is always compare it to wherever you were before and say, like, you know, over there we did it this way. You should really, that can get old really quickly. But one of the funny things about leadership, right, is that you can't lead people to where they are. So in a sense, the moment you offer yourself for any leadership position or a significant leadership role with a group, you're trying to pull that group somewhere, which means there's something in your perspective that is other than allowing things to simply go the way they're already going and follow their gravity. You know, some of the great, I can't remember who wrote about this, but some of the truest and most American understandings of literary heroes are based on this fact, like the cowboy, like all those cowboy movies. Cowboys always like kind of isolated from the community, and then he winds up coming and saving them from themselves somehow. You know, same thing with the hard-boiled detective. It's always like a little bit at odds, and that's how he figures out what's going on. You know. So I actually think in a paradoxical way, we think of the leader as like the class president, the most popular person who gets along with everybody and you know, looks, sounds, talks, and walks exactly like everybody else. I would say actually part of what makes you useful is that in some way or another, you're not like the others. All the ways in which you conform amount to sort of maybe your belonging or your professionalism. But all the ways in which you don't, what that adds up to is your style. And I think in that sense, the fact that you have a different perspective could actually be a real asset.
Hi, my name is Philip James. I'm from Alameda, California. And so I did go home. Alameda is where I'm from. And any East Bay people, shout out. What advice would you give to us who are thinking about running, but basically any seat we would be running for in our home district is already very blue, very liberal. We'd be challenging very progressive incumbents to run for these seats. What advice do you have if that's our situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the real question is why? right? If there's a good reason why it matters that it's you and not somebody else in that job, then you'll be able to articulate that. If the only reason you want to run is so that a progressive can have that seat, then obviously there's not much to be gained by knocking one progressive off and replacing them with another. If, on the other hand, you have a different way, or you have a different view, or a different policy, or something that makes it different, then why not? Let the voters figure that out, right? I think we need, though, to get out of a mode of conceiving our ambitions in terms of the job we would like to have. By the time I was in college, I figured out that I might want to run for office someday. I never would have guessed that state treasurer or DNC chair or even mayor would have ever been on that list. If you'd asked me to be the 3 jobs I'd be most likely to run for, it would have been 3 different ones. So it's not always where you think it's going to be. But I think the most important thing is to conceive your aspirations in terms of the impact you want to have, and then follow the impact into the job rather than the other way around. And so if the best way you could have an impact is to bump off a rival from within your same party in a contested race, and you think you can do it, you may as well go for it. The voters will tell you whether or not it's going to work. But it may also be that there's another way to have that impact that isn't as obvious, but could be even more compelling.
Any other questions? Siraj, you got one? Lee's got it.
Hi, my name is Katrina Chan. I'm originally from LA. I lived in DC for 4 years, and now I've followed my husband to central Pennsylvania, which is sometimes referred to as Pennsyltucky.
Yeah.
I'm one of the only progressives in a secret Facebook group meeting other progressives, and one of the only people of color in this community. So I really like your theme of inviting people to move back home and try to make a difference where they're from, but I think do you have any suggestions on how we can encourage progressives to move to places where they're not from to make a difference in communities that, frankly, people like me don't even really want to live in?
Wow. Well, all right, a couple ideas. So, first of all, I don't know if this will really answer the question or not, but I'm going to try with 2 thoughts. One thought is you're in an extremely important spot because it really matters what's going on in places where those who share our values are there, but are definitely in the minority. They're still there. And I think there's this critical mass. I don't know where it is, but there's some number. Maybe it's around 30%. And if you fall below that number, then the people who think that way aren't even willing to admit it around other people. When they're on their way to coffee or coming back from church and they disagree with the table talk about Trump or whatever, they're not even going to be willing to raise their voice because they think nobody will back them up. And so the role that you can play, the role and let's be honest, sometimes it's fun to be up against that wall, right? To know that like you're the few and the proud, right? You draw an energy from that, right? There's a propulsion in that. But it's also extremely important because there are a lot of places in this country where, especially when you think about statewide, you look at an individual county, and it's going to really matter, even if we're going to get clobbered there no matter what, really matters whether it works out to be 80-20 or whether it's 60-40. And the reason is there's so many counties. In Indiana, Joe Donnelly, a Democratic United States Senator, won, I believe, 11 out of our 92 counties. Part of why he won was because he really won those 11 counties big, right? But the other part of why he won was he made sure he showed up in enough other places that the margin was close enough, even though he got beat, even though he didn't have a chance. It was close enough that the other ones could put him over the top. So keep doing what you're doing. The other thing I would say is that, look, you're not going to win everybody over on every issue. But one of the great things about the local, one of the other reasons I believe salvation comes from the local, is that that's where you can establish the common ground. You can get away from some of the BS by getting away from the labels and just talking about where people's lives are at. My partner's family is pretty politically conservative, but his mother has a kind of skin cancer that is very treatable if and only if you have this topical chemotherapy. It's a tube of cream. I mean, it looks like almost like sunscreen or something, only it's $3,000 a pop. And the only reason she's alive is because of the Affordable Care Act and the ability to get this treatment. She's exactly the kind of person that the people in power now pretend to care about. She and her husband run a landscaping business out of the house. They're just good people. They have pretty different politics from us, but we've talked about what happens on her kitchen table enough, right? That we're now in the same place on this very important political issue. But on those closer to home issues, see, the beautiful thing about the local level is it can only get so ideological because we all have a common basis of how we want to live. And actually, it's pretty similar. I mean, everybody wants to live in a safe community with clean, safe drinking water and good schools and nice parks. That's why a lot of people who hate taxes in general will still vote for a specific tax for a road or a schools issue in their community. And the other great thing about local stuff, if you get involved there, is you're not in the same fact-free world. Like as a mayor, either I filled in the hole in the road or I didn't. You can tell, right? Either I plowed the snow or I didn't. It's not like proving I wasn't born in Kenya. Like, you can tell. And there's something about that just grounds us. And I think it's one of the reasons why you see people more likely to convince other people of things across the aisle when you're thinking about being close to home and talking to people about things they care about. And try not to judge them. You know, even when you hear things that are just kind of like, whoa, you think that? Just start by sticking to the stuff you think you can find some common ground on. And you might be surprised how far you can grow out of that common ground. Not by shooting for the ideological middle or becoming politically conservative, but just by looking for those things that actually we all believe, we just have learned to talk about them in radically different ways.
Please join me in thanking Mayor Pete.